Permission over here. Yes, that's right. And we'll start this private webinar side. Good morning, everybody, and Merry Christmas from just south of Madison, Wisconsin. My name is Eric Johnson, and I'm your host for Close the Distance, Dawn Patrol, Christmas Day edition. And I'm here with Monica Nixon. Good morning, Monica.
Hi, Eric. Good morning.
Are you having a Merry Christmas out in Sun Valley, where I believe you're on vacation this week?
We haven't quite got the whole party up yet. Ross and I are tinkering around, but there's a couple dogs that are milling around. So we're waiting for the other two and then my sister to wake up. So then we'll do our little Christmas.
I love it. That is so cool. Well, I wish you a very, very merry holiday, and however you choose to spend it, I hope that you have peace as a result of your time with your family.
Well, thank you. And same to you. And I hope the world has a little more peace in 2022.
Amen to that, sister. Well, for those of you watching this, I'll tell you what we're about here. This is going to be a short one so that I can maintain peace in my household, because doing a live stream on Christmas morning is not exactly what happens in the Johnson home typically. But this is something new. Last year when the pandemic hit, I started a show called Close the Distance as a private webinar series. And we ran that series here in Wisconsin. We talked to CEOs from many of the leading companies here in the region. Had a tremendous amount of, very cool analysis that was produced, both in terms of how the pandemic was affecting us and how our industrial response to that was evolving. We are doing this series this week because no one expects it. And you may, actually, I forgot to turn off the Christmas music here in my master bedroom where I'm coming to you from, but hopefully that's not too much of a distraction. Today, we're going to talk very briefly about ecological control factors, and sort of where this fits in is there is a technique that the company I work for, Aurora Worldwide Development Corporation, and I started the company, actually it'll be 27 years in February. And as my grandpa used to say, if I'd known I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. But anyhow, there is a technique known as superiority analysis, and there is a portion of superiority analysis called control factor theory, which we're launching Close the Distance here over the holidays to describe and explore a little bit about 2022. And the place where we're focusing is really the discovery of the macro environment. It's represented by a box. Mr. Garland, Merry Christmas, brother. Glad you're here.
Morning.
I'm just getting us going. And it's going to be a short one today, or else I'm in trouble. So we have this box of the boundaries of the macro environment, and inside that box are the landscape on which your organization, as an actor trying to express power into that landscape, needs to act.
Sure.
You have stakeholders. Stakeholders are the people who stand to win or lose as a result of your actions. Those stakeholders have issues, and those issues are the concerns and priorities that those stakeholders sequence relative to each other that you have to take into account in order to influence them and how they're going to respond to your actions. And then finally, you've got trends, and there's different types of trends which are driving the future of your landscape and how the stakeholders are responding to their issues in that landscape. So that's the macro environment, and that's a 30-second version of that. Within the macro environment, we use the abbreviation STEEPLED to describe the control factors that really no one controls, the uncontrollables that your organization and stakeholders are going to have to cope with. STEEPLED is short for social, technological, economic, ecological, which is our topic for today, political, legal, ethical, and demographic. And Monica and Eric, two of my close friends from the priesthood of ambiguous scientists, as I've started calling it, we're the ones who sort of interpret ambiguity and try and derive reality from that. Have been exploring the last several days the control factors that fall into that contingency macro environmental box. So with that, I got to cut this off about 9 o'clock. It's about 8:40 already, and we need to get rolling on. What are your topics? And Monica, I'm going to call on you first. What are your priorities for 2022 in terms of what you're looking at from the ecological sphere? And when I say ecological sphere, I think a lot of people go, naturally to kind of carbon and, global warming and that sort of thing. And the ecological sphere is way bigger and more complex than just that singular political issue, which we can talk about when we talk politics tomorrow. So Monica, give us your thoughts.
Well, I work in software, as you know, right? National security related critical infrastructure protection. So I'm not sure that, frankly, this has been an angle that I've worried so much about, not being someone who produces. And I know I'm being very limiting, that people like somebody like Boeing would worry about given what they produce or something like that. I look a lot more at some of the other factors. I guess when I think about that, I'm guilty of reductionism. I think about like rare earth metals and how Apple can keep producing iPhones, and so forth, right? And I wonder about those things. And then it takes me down the pathway, just like one of the things like about appliances, how anymore you're supposed to, they last about 5 years and your parents probably still have their 25-year-old Maytag. So I think about how that paradigm is going to be viable, I guess, on an ongoing basis, because everybody wants these ever escalating, ever faster replacement cycles to get your money. And that's very wasteful. So I think about that. That's a big part of, the corporate thing underlying, I guess you could say, in tech, which has been my area, how viable that is on an ongoing basis. It isn't just tech. I mean, like I said, it could be appliances, other things that use, those types of resources and end up being disposable. I think it's a very sustainable paradigm.
The obsolescence of planned obsolescence, in other words, in this ecological prioritized future. Mr. Garland.
I am just so gosh darn glad we started with rare earth metals and mining as part of the ecology. Yep, because, okay, the carbon thing. I'm bored. The oil companies have known about that since the 70s, if not before that. My Coates and Jarrett, when I worked for Joe Coates as a futurist in Washington, we had that a zillion years ago. We keep burning dead dinosaur food. We move the paradigm beyond that, get out, roll out technologies that capture carbon, plant trees. It's not that hard. It's just something we have to do. And that's going to get into politics. And it just sucks up 99% of all the oxygen, wrong metaphor. People are always talking about that. The rare earth metals, that is where the rubber meets the road, baby. Because what we've had in the geopolitical landscape responding to all that has been a brand new geopolitical alliance most people don't know about, because my clients do, because I'm all over that, called the Quad. That's the United States, Australia, India, and Japan. Now, can any of you think of a large strategically important Asian nation that is not mentioned in that list?
Conspicuously absent.
It's Bhutan. That's right. Bangladesh, cruelly left out. No, the alliance exists. It's one of its stated goals is to lock China out of the critical earth metal business, because China's made so many inroads to control this, which has been they've made no secret about in various continents. South America, Africa, Australia, and they're like, hey, everything, and it relates to the climate issue, because it's like, look, we're gonna go electrical for about everything. Combustion engines and whatnot is not going to be the source of energy for fleet, i.e. trucks and cars and whatnot. We're going to be making electricity and we're going to be sending it around. That needs those metals. And they're like, we want to control the future. And finally, in 2020, this came together. How about no? And these four countries got together, and not long after that, you're seeing they're exchanging military technologies. They're talking about new defense pacts and whatnot. So that all came from, where's the lithium? Where's the chromium and the thorium? I'm trying to think of all the little, cobalt and stuff like that nobody thinks about. And Competitive Futures, my company, we were working on that in 2007 on the future of the mining scape. And it's like, it turns out there's enough of that stuff in the Earth's crust. The question is, where is it? Who has access to it, and who can refine it? But it's not going to run out necessarily very soon. Although, to Monica's point, we also have this sort of insane, product life cycle thing where you can recapture, some of those, some of those rare earths through some pretty ecological. It's ironic. It's a very ecologically damaging practice, but you can. In fact, one of the things I worked on for competitive intelligence late '90s was about what we were going to do with all the cathode ray tubes. Remember the giant, CRT computer screens that we all had? Well, those had to be thrown out, and there was a lot of lead, gold, platinum, in trace amounts, and how those were made up. And so there was a worldwide industry in recapturing those, but basically got to melt down a bunch of old televisions. And so there was a company called Noranda that did this in northern Quebec, and the fog that would hit people's cars were different colors every day. So suggested there's some there's some side effects ecologically when you do this, but basically the plastics would go off the top, and then you'd be left by the different molecular weights of the materials. You could then siphon off the gold, the this, the that. Making these products so quickly, that process to get that stuff back, of course, is messy. By the way, also, when you're doing that with the sanitation industry, are there any externalities about working with the sanitation industry that you might think of?
Well, of course. And, so I'm glad we got to rare earth metals here because, so to your point, yes. And let me take us in a slightly different direction. Okay. And again, political's tomorrow. We're going to do political tomorrow. But you guys may have noticed that we had a very, I'll call it sloppy withdrawal from Afghanistan a few months ago. And I believe that Bagram Air Base is slowly being colonized by some of our erstwhile members of the Chinese Communist Party as a result of the fantastic deposits of lithium and other rare earths to be found in Afghanistan. In spite of the fact that we created the world's 7th largest military essentially overnight, over a weekend anyway, in the form of the Taliban, by surrendering about $87 billion worth of materiel. Again, politicals tomorrow. But the consequences of surrendering, that amount of strategic minerals, I think will ultimately be something that we may look back on with some regret in the future. One final comment from me, and then I'm going to let you two take us out, because as I said, I got to be off this thing by 9:00 or divorce proceedings ensue if I'm not down eating Swedish pancakes with my wife and children around the Christmas tree here in the not too distant future. Final thing that I kind of want to leave out, and I do think we need to come back to this, is there is a public perception that weather is a symptom of the whole global warming phenomenon, carbon, etc. And I'll use the very green lawn that you see out my window here in southern Wisconsin on Christmas Day, 2021. This is really unusual. I walked the dogs in my shorts last night down the driveway, and normally on Christmas Eve, that would not be something
that wouldn't be smart,
without risking frostbite and potential, dismemberment as a consequence of all of that. So I do want us to think about ecological as well as being an actual sort of strategic investment opportunity. It's also a public relations problem. And the notion that if it's a little warmer or there's a little more fierce tornado or, whatever it is that you're experiencing from a weather effect, that seems to be a really big red herring for global warming. And we've got to do something about. We've got to stop driving cars tomorrow. We've got to basically go wind and solar for all of our electrical generation. Texas last winter, you may recall they had a problem with renewables being reliable. So anyway, I want to make sure that we don't leave that, because that will be a tableau for mistake making.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a big deal. But okay, like we get a little weird on this. It's, you know, the ecology side here, because we're going to talk about the weather. Did you know that weather changing technologies were outlawed in the Geneva Convention in the 1970s?
I didn't know that.
Like, it was actually, I think, in response to some of the cloud seeding that was done, I think, by the United States over Vietnam. That you could use, I think, titanium particles, and I forget the exact technology. And you know, so you could create more rainfall than would normally be happening, and they were doing that to suppress the North Vietnamese army. And that was added to the Geneva Conventions on Warfare, I think, in 1971. But after Hurricane Katrina, there's some people in my defense community who are like, what are you hearing about on a macro scale, basically weather control technologies? And I'm like, well, you're the one. You work in a dark, lightless vault down. Like, what are you hearing? Like, we don't talk about it much up here. And in the years since, you know, there may be some things classified that we don't think about. And, you know, I sometimes wonder, because we do have directed energy weapons on ships that they're, you know, laying claim to. So, like, basically lasers, heat ray kind of a thing. You know, what if there are some actors firing lasers at glaciers to, you know, to tread on our cortisol, as we become hip saying? You know, how much of that is PR? Of like, oh, you know, these things keep happening at an increased rate. And look, you know, you don't want to go full moon landing truth or anything, but you know, it's not something I'm inventing, that there's weather control technology out there. If it had to be banned, I just wonder, you know, if this is a geopolitical thing that is going to affect, that part of ecology is going to affect, you know, Russia's borders or some of its economic opportunities by getting at the stuff underneath in the crust, up in the Arctic area. So I just wonder if anyone's trying to put a thumb on the scale. I mean, you had irregular, was it irregular warfare or
unrestricted warfare? Unrestricted
warfare. There's some broad thinking people out in the world in military positions. I wonder if they think about ecology as a geopolitical landscape itself and a weapon.
They definitely do. I can say with confidence, it is for them, it's an influence factor. They can influence ecological results. To us, they're uncontrollable. So really good stuff. Monica, I'm going to give you the last word before we close it out for our abbreviated session today. And by the way, Kathy Gray says, hi, Merry Christmas on YouTube. So we're interacting with a YouTube audience. It's a big milestone. And by the way, thank you, everybody. I forget to do this whole like and subscribe and share and all that sort of stuff, because I think that's kind of sleazy. But do that stuff if you find this valuable, and hopefully you'll join us again.
Smash the like button.
I decided to
like button. What is that? What the YouTubers say?
Yeah, that's what you're gonna say.
Monica's got her Baileys and coffee going on Christmas Day. So Monica, final word.
Well, when you guys were just talking there, I just had a little nightmare in my head of imagining Greta Thunberg, you know, and having a DoD briefing on these technologies. Imagine.
Right.
That's all I have to say about that.
Right. Well, you know, it's become, I think, from a public relations standpoint and sort of culturally, you know, culture is a really, really important determinant of how successful your strategy will be. I think I shared that a few days ago, that Peter Drucker's Culture Eats Strategy for Breakfast observation is, enforced here. And certainly the whole trend around ESG from a corporate governance standpoint is certainly how I think companies are trying to cope with this particular domain of uncontrollables. But I think there's a deeper story there. I think those are surface level indicators that underneath there is much, much deeper water that I think we're going to get into on this show. And I don't know that we're necessarily going to structure the way in which we examine these things according to STEEPLED, but STEEPLED is the way that our audience should start thinking about some of these domains and sorting these domains. It's also the way, and I haven't mentioned this to you two yet, but it's also the way we're developing the First Light platform. First Light is our environmental scanning and current awareness system. And as we sort of take that from the Web 2.0 world of the last 16 years since we started that business into the Web 3.0 world of decentralized and distributed ledger and all of the technologies that accompany that, that product shift and pivot for us requires a more disciplined structure around discovery. And by the way, that's what we call this whole domain. We're discovering the macro environment and its contours so that we can understand in higher resolution reality, what is really happening. And that's what we do, guys. If you're interested in the intelligence field as intelligence analysts, we're interpreters of reality. And there is but one reality. There are many perspectives on that reality. So Eric, you look like you got something to share.
You get 2 minutes before pancakes. I just want to save your marriage.
I appreciate that. I super, super appreciate anyone who's watching with us here on Christmas morning. I hope that you all find peace and love in your day ahead. As we close out 2021, my tremendous thanks to Monica and Eric for helping me keep my promise to myself, which I made earlier this year, which was to relaunch Close the Distance. And you guys are helping me do that. So thank you. I love you both.
Who's that? Love you.
Merry Christmas, everybody.